Welcome to this presentation on epiphytic cactus species. This is part 2, and in this section we're going to discuss epiphytic cacti belonging to the tribes Rhipsalideae, Lymanbensoniae, and Phyllocacteae. Let's start with tribe Rhipsalideae. This is a very large tribe of epiphytic cacti. The center of diversity is the coastal Atlantic forest in eastern Brazil. So here you see a map of Brazil is the larger map, and then the smaller area outlined in yellow is the area where most of these species occur naturally. The habitats in this area range from sea level up to the high mountain forests. So the habitats can vary from being moist forest to cool moist high altitude to dry seasonal deciduous. So different species may have different requirements based upon, where they naturally grow in nature. The tribe Rhipsalideae contains the following genera: Hatiora, Lepismium, Rhipsalideopsis, Rhipsalis, and Schlumbergera. And Rhipsalis alone has 45 species, so we've got quite a few species in the tribe Rhipsalideae. Now, a lot of these are not commonly found in the wild, and you can see why. Here's the Atlantic forest in 1500. And look at all that green areas there, heavily green, dark green, meaning that was quite forested. But there's been so much development. We have Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, and it's been heavily populated. So the Atlantic forest in 2012 has been reduced by quite a bit. So a loss of habitat is causing reduction in numbers of these plants. First, we're going to take a look at genus Hatiora from the Atlantic rainforests of southeastern Brazil. There are 2 species in the genus Hatiora. Both of them have small, bell-shaped colored flowers at the terminal ends of the stems and are pollinated by insects. The stems are mostly circular in cross-section, and the species are Hatiora herminiae and Hatiora salicornioides. This is Hatiora salicornioides. The name is kind of a mouthful. The person that named this plant thought it looked similar to Salicornia, which is a marsh plant known as pickleweed, so he named it Hatiora salicornioides. It's also commonly known as drunkard's dream because the little stem segments are kind of narrow in the middle and they look sort of like a glass bottle. It's also known commonly as dancing bones because in addition to looking like a bottle, you can use your imagination and you might think it looks like a leg bone or an arm bone. So the stems are segmented and cylindrical. It produces golden flowers which don't fully open. This is about as open as they get. And it's from the Atlantic forest in southeastern Brazil at elevations from as low as 660 feet up to 5,740 feet. As to why the flowers don't fully open, I'm not sure. Sometimes plants will do that when they self-pollinate, but I've never seen fruit form on my Hatiora salicornioides, so I don't know why the flowers don't fully open. That's a condition called being cleistogamous, when you have self-fertile flowers and they don't completely open because they don't need to. And here's a couple of pictures of just the plants so you can kind of get an idea of what they look like. Kind of cool looking. Here is a form of Hatiora salicornioides. It's slightly different. It's not different enough from the main species to be considered a subspecies, but it is different. So it's considered a different form. And this is Forma cylindrica. In the past, this was also called Bambusoides. You may find it under that name. This particular form grows pretty straight upright. It's rather bushy, and it does not cascade down like the other form of Hatiora salicornioides does. And in this particular form, the flowers do open fully. This is a species with very pretty pink flowers, Hatiora herminiae. It's somewhat difficult to grow on its own roots. It's considered endangered in nature. This particular specimen that I bought is grafted onto a Paraskeopsis. It's from southeast Brazil in cloud forest, and it grows at elevations between 4,900 to 6,600 feet, so it will enjoy cooler weather. I do not grow mine outdoors because my temperature here in the inland valley gets to be over 100 degrees for quite extended periods in the summertime, so I keep this indoors. Even so, I made a mistake in culture with this plant. I thought because it was grafted onto a very tough-looking stalk that I wouldn't have to water it as much, and I let it get a little too dry, and it started to drop clades. So the clades otherwise look pretty healthy, so I stuck them in bark. And guess what? They took root and they're starting to grow. So I've got the grafted specimen and I've got a couple little plants starting on their own roots. So we'll see what happens. Oh, and there on the picture on the right, you can see I had 2 flowers on my plant, and I'm assuming they must be self-fertile because I had 2 little, it looks like berries forming. There you can see one. So I don't know if it's a berry or if it's just, I don't know if it's been fertilized or gonna produce seeds for me. We'll see. Next, we come to genus Lepismium from South America, Bolivia, Brazil, Argentina. And the term lepismium comes from the Greek lepis, meaning scale, and it refers to small scales that are set beneath the areoles. An interesting fact on this genus is the flowers are oftentimes scented. So this includes the species Cruciforme, Floribundum, Hulatianum, Lineaire, Lawrenceanum, Lumbricoides, and Warmingianum. And there you can see my Lepismium cruciforme spiralis. You can see those spirally branches. It's a really cool plant. I really like it. Lepismium cruciforme is pretty widespread. You can find it pretty easily. Cruciforme means cross-shaped, and it refers to the stem shape when viewed in cross-section. This particular species comes from Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, and it can have 2-angled up to 5-angled growth. I think mine has quite a bit of 3-angled growth, or did. My plant didn't make it, but it did have quite a bit of 3-angled growth. And there are several forms of Lepismium cruciforme, a lot of diversity in the morphology of the plant. It blooms from September through May, and the flowers do stay open during the daytime. So that's my plant. Look how beautiful that stem is with all those flowers on it. So pretty. Here's Lepismium cruciforme spiralis again. There's a little white flower you can see there at the areole. Here's another form of Lepismium cruciforme called Domingus martins, referring to where it's found. It's got that beautiful deep red fruit. There you can see on the right, a beautiful mature plant with the fruit all up and down the branches, just beautiful. I got a cutting of this one, and I'm hoping it's going to do as well for me as it did for Camilla. Here's a comparison of Lepismium cruciforme Domingus martins above, and Lepismium cruciforme, that's the regular variety that we normally would see. It's cavernosum is what it's referred to as. So they're a little bit different. Here's another form of Lepismium cruciforme called anceps. Anceps means 2-angled, and it's noted for having flat 2-angled stems and white flowers. And the flowers may also have a violet tinge. So look how interesting that branch is. There's a picture showing how it is with a bit of light. It turns kind of orange. There's the fruit to the left. Now this particular plant, Lepismium floribundum, has not actually been recognized. There's a particular website, caryophyllales.org, which lists all the accepted genera of cactus, and Lepismium floribundum, or is a species, I should say. The species is not recognized on that website, so I don't know what the hangup is. I think some may regard it as a variety of cruciforme, but according to its discoverer, Frank Suplee, it is not. It's its own species, and it's a Lepismium. So it's native to South Brazil, It has three-angled growth for the most part. It's a pretty heavy bloomer. I have it. I love it. I love how those veins get that purplish tinge to them. Really pretty. And it easily forms fruit. Just a beautiful, beautiful cultivar to grow. Lepismium lumbricoides. It got its name because lumbricus means intestinal worms. So I guess they thought that the stems kind of resembled worms. This particular specimen was collected in Argentina, and it's also found in Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia, in altitudes up to 6,000 feet. This is Lepismium huletianum. It's named for the French botanist Jean-Baptiste Thoulet. It naturally occurs in Argentina, Brazil, and Bolivia at elevations to 6,200 feet. Now there are two different forms. Form Ragnelli, which you see on the right, has snow white flowers. Form huletianum, which you see below, has some pinkish, orangish filaments. So those are the two different forms. Now, not only is there a difference between the flowers on these two forms of Lepismium huletianum, there are also sort of different morphology of the branches. You can see in the little photo below, on the left we have form huletianum, kind of a really wide, looks like a more delicate branch. And on the right side we see form Ragnelli, which is more a standard strap-like looking branch. Then we have Lepismium warmingianum, which does not have flatter branches like the huletianum. It's got sort of cylindrical branches. This is from southern Brazil to Paraguay and northern Argentina at elevations up to 3,600 feet in seasonal forests. And the fruit is dark red to black. Really pretty thing. Lepismium lawrenceanum is found in Bolivia and Argentina. The fruit is purple, and it's considered to be a sister species to warmingianum. It's got a little bit flatter branches than warmingianum. Genus Rhipsalideae is commonly referred to as Easter cactus. The name means like Rhipsalis. These plants are from South Brazil. There are two species, Gardneri and Rosea. They have flat stems. They have a short tube at the base of the flowers. And these plants in this genus were previously classified as Hatiora or Schlumbergera. And you can see pictures here. There is a cross called Graceri, which is a cross of the two species, Gardneri and Rosea. And these are two examples of the flowers they got when crossing the two species. Rhipsalideae gardneri is the first of the species. It comes from southeastern Brazil. It grows at 1,100 up to 4,300 foot elevation. It has red flowers and red fruit. It requires cool winter temps to set buds. It prefers shade and even moisture at the roots. And it's named for a man, Mr. Gartner from Brazil, who introduced it. Here is another lovely Rhipsalideae hybrid, a beautiful plant. Here's the other Rhipsalideae species, Rosea, from South Brazil. It has beautiful pink flowers in early spring. And if it's over or underwatered, it's a little temperamental, little drop clades. It's a more compact plant and a little bit smaller flower than Rhipsalideae gardneri. Next, we'll look at genus Rhipsalis. Rhips means wickerwork, so its name is derived from the way it kind of looks like wickerwork or basket weave. You can kind of see how it gets that name because some of these plants, when they really have a lot of growth hanging down and intertwining with each other, it's very beautiful. So this is the most widely distributed of all the cactus groups. The stems can be ribbed, angled, cylindrical, winged, or flat, and they're usually spineless. The stems may have determinate growth, which means it only grows a certain length and then stops, and then new segments will shoot out from the end. And when they get to the certain length, they'll stop. Or it can have indeterminate growth, which means the stem will have a long growth. There's no ending, no determinate point where it stops growing. The stem segments can be very long. Now, usually the plants of this genus have small white yellow flowers, but there are some exceptions. These plants are found in the Caribbean, Central and South America, mostly in the southeast Brazil in the Atlantic forest. One species, Rhipsalis, is found in Africa, Madagascar, and the islands of the Indian Ocean. So Rhipsalis is the largest genus of epiphytic cacti. There are 45 currently accepted species at caryophyllales.org, and they divided those into subgenera, which sort of depends on how closely related they are. So there's these different groups. There's Phylloarthrorhipsalis, Rhipsalis, Goniorhipsalis, Epalagogonium, Erythrorhipsalis, and Calamorhipsalis. And just a word on the pronunciation. I say Rhipsalis. I've heard botanists that pronounce it Rhipsalis. I hear a lot of people just commonly call it Rhipsalis, Rhipsalis. So there's no right or wrong way to say it. I say Rhipsalis, you say Rhipsalis, potato, potato. There's a beautiful picture that my friend sent me. Oh no, actually I took that photo. I took that photo at the Pentico. That's a Rhipsalis flacosa subspecies pulvinigera. And that is out of subspecies Calamorhipsalis. And we'll give you a little idea. It's not really important, the differences in the subgenera, but it's kind of fun to know how they got grouped differently. So we're going to be showing these in order of how they're genetically related to each other. I'm not showing them in alphabetical order. It's going to be by their genetic relationship. First grouping of species of Rhipsalis we're going to take a look at are all considered to be under the heading of subgenus Phyllarthrorhipsalis, which is the joint-leafed varieties. Joint-leafed Rhipsalis is literally what that title means. The stems on these plants are mostly flat, or they can be 4 to 5 angled. The growth is described as non-erumpent, which means the growth does not form within the stem and then burst through. And the growth is also described as non-flacose, which means there are no hairiness or woolliness at the areoles or underneath the buds. And there are often multiple flowers per areole. Rhipsalis elliptica is from southeast Brazil. The stems can be dark green to magenta or purple, and they can be very wide. The one I'm showing you here is just a very small plant that I have in my collection that's just a new start. They usually have 1 bud per areole, but they can have 2 to 3. And what really makes this determination of this species is when you see the flower, you'll see lots of stamens. They can be up to 100 stamens. So that's how you'll kind of, when the plant finally blooms and you see all those stamens, you can say, ah, yes, this is really elliptica. The flowers are yellow and the fruit is pinkish. And there we have a little more example. There's the fruit. There's the yellowish flower. Here is Rhipsalis micrantha. Micrantha means small flower. Micro is small, anthus is flower. This particular species is widespread, very morphologically diverse, meaning it's got several different forms to the plant shape. And it ranges from the Andean forests in Ecuador and Peru to Venezuela, Colombia, and Costa Rica. It does not naturally occur in Brazil like many of the other Rhipsalis species. The regional subspecies include Rauiorum, Micrantha, and Coburgii. So first let's take a look. Here I'm showing you a couple of pictures of Rhipsalis micrantha, subspecies Micrantha. It's got flat clades They're generally two-angled or flat, but sometimes they can be three-angled, but mostly two angles. And this particular subspecies occurs in Costa Rica, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Peru, and up to 6,500 feet elevation. Here's Rhipsalis micrantha, subspecies rariorum from Ecuador. Oftentimes will be found terrestrially growing, so that makes it kind of unusual. And it's from arid regions, so it can grow with a little more dryness to 5,600 foot elevation. And what makes this different from the other micrantha subspecies is it's got kind of scalloped edging on the stem segments. And it can have two or three angled growth. Mostly you'll see two angled growth. And there is the fruit on my plant, kind of translucent white. We have Rhipsalis micrantha, subspecies Kerbergii. That's from Ecuador and Costa Rica, from arid regions, meaning also this one could take a little dryness. It grows from sea level up to 5,600 foot elevation. And what makes this subspecies Kerbergii different is it's got thinner and sort of rounded cylindrical stems. They can have up to 7 angles, but they're generally more rounded, but they do have the furrows in them. So they can sometimes be, compared to sulcata or pentatera, but it's its own species. It's its own subspecies of Micrantha Kerbergii. I love that fruit. Look how pretty and pink that is. Rhipsalis rhombia is from coastal Brazil. It gets its name from the way the clades have a diamond shape. That's called a rhomboid shape. But the growth can also be three-angled, and it can get very reddish and strong light. A lot of times the edges of the clades are kind of dark purplish. The flowers are tiny, white or yellow, and they have 5 to 7 petals. And there's a relatively short pericarpal compared to the perianth, which is the ovary as compared to the flower bud. Here's my specimen of Rhipsalis rhombia. You can see on the photo on the right, the clades that have been exposed to a lot of sunlight when I put it outdoors in the spring, they really got reddish. The newer growth is coming out green because it's in heavy shade right now. And on the left picture, you can see a little three-angled segment, a couple of three-angled segments. So they can be flat, they can be three-angled. The berries are usually dark, but they can be white. So there are my berries. Closely related to rhombia is Rhipsalis gubeliana. This is from Bolivia. It grows to 800 feet altitude, so not that high altitude. The stems are flat. They have serrated to dentate edges, meaning they're sort of indented in a little bit. The stems are a vivid green color, and the flowers are similar to rhombia, but they're a little bit larger. But this one has elongated ovary or pericarpal and a long stigma. It's hard to tell from these pictures. You can't really see the stigma easily. There's a little better close-up. Very pretty when it's in flower. Rhipsalis cuneata comes from Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru. There are a couple of subspecies, subspecies cuneata and subspecies australis. The branches are sort of wedge-shaped. It has tiny white flowers with a small pericarpal or a small ovary, and it does tend to grow better with higher humidity. There's been some discussion about possibly reorganizing these. Some botanists regard Cuneata, Gubeliana, and Occidentalis as the same species, and they would like to call them all Cuneata. So look for that to possibly change in the future as far as taxonomy goes. Next we have Rhipsalis ewaldiana, which you would be kind of surprised that this would be so closely related to those flat clade varieties that we just saw. This is from the Atlantic Brazilian forest. It grows in up to 1,350-foot altitude, and it's got what we call dimorphic growth, meaning there's two different types of growth. It has triangular segments. It's got these long basal shoots that come up, and it's got little triangular segments that grow off of the basal shoots, from which the white flowers and the pink-white fruit are formed. Now there is a similar clone that we think is a type of Ewaldiana, and that's been widely sold in the U.S. as Rhipsalis sulcata, but they are not the same at all. Here we've got a close-up of the flowers of Ewaldiana. Rhipsalis occidentalis comes from Peru, Ecuador, Suriname, and Bolivia, and it grows at elevations up to about 3,000 feet, so not particularly high elevations, and it flowers in early summer. Here are the flowers. Very pretty, not too many petals. I did have fruit on this, and I believe the fruit was white. Rhipsalis oblonga from the eastern Brazil Atlantic coastal forest to 4,300-foot elevation. This one can also get nice dark coloring to the stem segments when it's grown in higher light. And Rhipsalis crispy marginata, which is not considered a separate species anymore. It's now considered to be just a part of Rhipsalis oblonga from eastern Brazil and the Atlantic coastal forests. It's got larger, wider stem segments than oblonga does, or the more commonly seen type of oblonga. It's got smaller areoles, and it's got slightly rose-colored fruits. Rhipsalis bartholdiae from eastern Brazil. It differs from crispata and oblonga in that it has red fruit and golden yellow flowers. You can see that pretty golden yellow flower there. And the plant itself is just lovely. Look at that, how it kind of twists and dances there on the right. Lovely plant. Rhipsalis crispata is from southeastern Brazil. This plant has a conspicuous midrib. The stem margins are crenated, kind of roughly looking, and it kind of has stiff growth, mostly flat to three-angled growth. It has large areoles, and it has stem venations that are noticeable in the on the clades. You can see the central midrib, and then the little veins going out to the edge of the clade there are very prominent. The flowers are kind of greenish, and the fruit is white. Rhipsalis olivifera from Brazil in the Rio de Janeiro area. It's at a rather high elevation, 5,200 to 6,000 feet. It's similar to elliptica, but it's got pale pinkish flowers, and when it forms berries, they are an olive green color. So that's how it got its name of olivifera. Rhipsalis Rhipsalideae is from a dry Atlantic forest in eastern Brazil. The stems are generally flat to three-angled. It's got clusters of small white flowers and purple fruit. It's one of the few that's got kind of purpley fruit. Rhipsalis triangularis from southeastern Brazil in the Rio de Janeiro area. It's more lithophytic. The stems are cylindric. They can be 3 to 5 winged. And this particular plant has fairly large white flowers. They can get up to an inch across. And the fruit is white to pink. This plant is critically endangered in nature. Here you can see on the right buds, flowers, and fruit, all on the same area of the stem there. And next we have Rhipsalis cereoides. Cereus is the word for a candle or a torch. So I guess this sort of gets its name from how it has the erect torch-like growth. It's from southeast Brazil in the Rio de Janeiro area, and generally lithophytic, meaning growing in rocky areas. The stems have 3 to 5 angles with straight margins. There is pink fruit that follows the white flowers. Rhipsalis agudoensis is named for the hill in Brazil where it was originally found. It's probably extinct in the wild. It was originally classified as Pachyptera, but they decided it was its own species after doing phylogenetic testing. It has 3 to 5 angled growth, and it blooms in the fall. Look at that specimen. So it's still considered by some as a form of Rhipsalis pachyptera. And here we have the closely related Pachyptera. Pachy means thick, ptera means wing, so it's got thick wings. It's widespread from southeast Brazil, from sea level up to 3,300 foot altitude, with robust branches that are flat to four-angled. It's got large whitish yellowish flowers, and it generally has up to 5 buds per areole, as you can see here on the specimen that I have. Quite a few buds there in each areole. Here's Pachyptera forma rubra, so named because the stem segments turn a very dark purple in highlight. I love that beautiful glossy satiny petals on the flower. Rhipsalis grandiflora is from eastern Brazil. It's epiphytic and epilithic. It grows in seasonal forests, meaning they're deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the wintertime, so it gets a little more light in the wintertime. To 4,000 foot altitude. The stems are cylindric. It's sort of purplish at the areoles, and it can have large white flowers. They can be up to 2 centimeters or about an inch, just under an inch across, and they have white fruit. And here's a couple more pictures of Rhipsalis grandiflora. Next, we have Rhipsalis pidieri from Venezuela. It grows at up to 5,000 foot elevation. This used to be a subspecies of Rhipsalis flacosa, but no longer. It's now its own species. It's got small greenish yellow flowers and white fruit. It's got a sort of a sunken ovary with white hairs, and it's fairly rare. Now we'll look at another subgenus. It's subgenus Rhipsalis. And these plants in this subgenus are characterized by having cylindrical or multi-angled stems and very small flowers. There's one example from this subgenus, Rhipsalis sulcata. Small flower, cylindrical stem. Rhipsalis sulcata is from Brazil. The stems are woody and pendant. They generally are 3 to 5 angled. The flowers are small, they're kind of whitish pink, and the fruit is pinkish. There's a beautiful photo of Rhipsalis sulcata growing in central Sao Paulo. So Rhipsalis sulcata is a little bit similar in morphology to Pentaptera or Micranthiform Kerbergii, but they're a little bit different. There's a photo comparing sulcata to Pentaptera. Sulcata is not quite as deeply furrowed as Pentaptera. And there's a mature plant in Horst Kundiger's collection that he was gracious enough to allow us to use in our slideshow. It's a beautiful plant. Here's my start of the plant. This is commonly sold in the US as Rhipsalis sulcata, but it is not. This looks like an Ewaldiana type of a plant. So if you've got a plant like this that's marked Rhipsalis sulcata and it's shooting up these branches and has dimorphic growth, sorry, but that's not correct. You have probably an Ewaldiana and not a sulcata. Now we're going to take a look at Rhipsalis teres. This species originates in southeastern Brazil, up to 3,200 feet altitude. It has dimorphic, slender, cylindrical stems. The flowers on this species are fairly small, they're white, and as the flowers fade, they turn yellow. The fruit is white to pink. And there are several variable forms. There are 3 extremes recognized, and there are probably intermediates between these different sizes as well. But there's Forma prismatica, Forma heteroclada, and Forma capilliformis. Now, how you can distinguish Rhipsalis teres from Rhipsalis bassifera is that the teres have flowers that fade to yellow. And teres has a very short pericarpal relative to the perianth, or it's got a very small ovary compared to the flower bud. So here is teres form prismatica, sometimes found growing in coastal sand. And some people have confused this with Rhipsalis cereuscula because they do have kind of a similar look to the plant when you look at the overall plant, like there on the right, but it does not have those small little tiny segments that cereuscula has. Here's teres form heteroclada, which has stout cylindrical stems. They're a little thicker. It's got yellowish flowers, and it's often found as a lithophyte, or growing on rocks, and growing in high light. Rhipsalis teres form capilliformis has slender stems and tiny greenish flowers. You can see how tiny that flower is. There's my fingertip next to it. Tiny. Rhipsalis bassifera or bassifera, however you want to pronounce it. It is named for copious berries. Bassi means berry. Fera means bearing. So it's bearing berries. It's the most widespread genus of all cactus species in nature. This particular species, Rhipsalis bassifera, is found in Central and South America. It's found in the Caribbean. It's found in Florida, Sub-Saharan Africa, Madagascar, Mauritius, and Sri Lanka. There are several subspecies of Bassifera, Pleistogama, Erythrocarpa, Morita, and Mauritiana. So the species that are found in the more northerly range and the ones that are found in the Old World are tetraploid, which means they have double the chromosome count as the other Bassifera that are in South America, in southern South America. And a lot of times when you find plants that are tetraploid, they have a lot of characteristics such as being larger, stouter, more vigorous. For instance, in iris are now tetraploid, and the diploid iris are very small, kind of tiny flowers, nothing too much to look at, but there was sort of a mutated form which has double the chromosome count, and that kind of gives us a lot of features that are sought after in horticulture. Here we see Rhipsalis bassifera or bassifera, however you would like to pronounce it, subspecies bassifera. This is very widespread from the Caribbean, eastern Mexico, Florida, Central America, and northern South America. It has elongated cylindric branches. The branches can be rather slender, from 1 millimeter up to 6 millimeter diameter, and the flowers and fruit are carried lateral on the branches. The flowers can be about 3 to 4 millimeters wide, so not really large. And the fruit is pink to white. The pericarpal, or the ovary, is sort of large relative to the perianth, or the flower bud. Bassifera subspecies horrida is in Madagascar, growing at up to 5,000 foot altitude, and it's got sort of neotenic growth, which means juvenile growth. You know, when you have a seedling and it's got kind of that kind of cylindrical, hairy look to it, that's neotenic growth. And even though this is a mature plant, it's got the growth that resembles immature growth. This particular plant also has mesotonic branching, which means it doesn't branch from the tips of the stems. It branches from the centers of the stems. Here's Bassifera subspecies horrida, and it has a crested version here, as so many of our cacti are seen to do. It'll crest occasionally. That's pretty interesting, I thought. And there on the right is an example of just the copious amount of flower buds on this particular species. It really can be laden down with flowers. Bassifera subspecies mauritiana, from tropical Africa, Sierra Leone and Ethiopia to Angola and eastern South Africa. This is a tetraploid variety. It's also found in the islands of the Indian Ocean, so it's very widespread. Large fruits, relatively thick branches. And there's also a variety being sold. I don't know if it's the same as this or slightly different. There's a variety called Ferrari. I don't know where they got that name from. I guess just a selling point. I don't know. And here are the branches. You can see how stout they are. The berries, it just has copious berries. They're very pretty. Rhipsalis hylocereeae. You can tell how common this is by the fact that I have no picture of it. I could find very little information, no picture anywhere, nobody who grows it. So to me, it's sort of a unicorn. But it supposedly exists in Bahia, Brazil, in an area with heavy rainfall, up to 5,900-foot elevation. And this was formerly a subspecies of Bassifera, very densely branched. It's named for the Hylocereeae forest. It resembles Rhipsalideae, but the flowers are white and the fruit is white pink. This is Rhipsalis mesembryanthemoides, and it gets its name because it resembles another plant that's called Mesembryanthemum. That's a type of an ice plant. It's not a cactus at all. But the person who named this thought that it looked like Mesembryanthemum, so there you have the name. It's from eastern Brazil, coastal areas to 2,000-foot altitude. The stems are dimorphic. There are long branches, and it's tightly packed with little branchlets that are a different shape than the main stems. It has small white flowers and white fruit. Rhipsalis schaeferi, from Paraguay, southern Bolivia, northern Argentina. This was formerly considered a subspecies of Bassifera, but now it's considered its own species. Pretty flowers, tiny, cool species. I'm kind of looking for it. I had something that was marked schaeferi, but I think it's probably Terry's capilliformis. You'll find Rhipsalis are notorious for being sold under the wrong name. They're very hard to ID sometimes. They get distributed under the wrong name, and it's hard to correct the error. So it's kind of a problem. We'll move along to subgenus Goniorhipsalis. Gonio means angled in Greek. And so these species in this subgenus are typified by angled continuous ribs, as opposed to the discontinuous ribs that you see in Paradoxa, which is in the Apalogogonium subgenus. Gosh, that's a mouthful. So here is a photo of Rhipsalis pentatera, one of the species in the subgenus Goniorhipsalis. This is Rhipsalis pentatera. It was originally found in eastern Brazil, but it's now considered to be extinct in nature. So if you're growing this in your garden, you're preserving an endangered species. It gets its name because it's got 5 angled growth. Penta means 5, terra means wings. It has kind of stiff outward growth, and the flowers form in clusters, and the fruit is white. Here you see examples of the flower on the left and the berries on the right. Here you can see Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis. This is named for Brazilian botanist Antonio Pacheco Leão, and this particular subspecies is Pacheco-leonis. It's a little more difficult to find than the other subspecies, Catenulata. Pachecoleonis subspecies Pachecoleonis is from the East Brazil Atlantic coastal forest. The growth is mostly indeterminate, which means it just kind of grows really long stem segments. The branches are very slightly angled, and the flowers are that very small but pretty kind of a pale pink. Very sought after species and not very easy to find. This is Rhipsalis pachecoleonis, subspecies catenulata. It's from eastern Brazil, and it has sharply angled, indeterminate stems. It's often erroneously referred to as a mini paradoxa. It looks similar in its growth pattern to paradoxa, but it's a totally unrelated species. And as a matter of fact, this particular subspecies, catenulata, it may be separated out into its own species soon and not be considered Pachecoleonis anymore. So we'll see what happens with that. The name of the subspecies, catenulata, catenulate means chain-like. So that's how it gets its name. Rhipsalis lindberghiana from eastern Brazil to 3,000 foot altitude has indeterminate growth. The pericarpal, which is the ovary, is smaller than the perianth, which is the bud. It flowers July through September. The flowers are white to greenish white. The fruit can be white, pink, or light red. Yeah, this is from the field guide, Cactaceae Rio de Janeiro, Creative Commons, so our thanks to them for allowing these photos to be out there to be used. Rhipsalis flagelliformis is a species from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It also has neotenic growth, meaning even on a mature plant, the growth resembles immature growth. It's a critically endangered species. The flowers are whitish with a reddish base. The fruit is red and it fades to white. This particular species was discovered in 2014 on the estate of Roberto Burle Marx. Next, we've got subgenus Epalogogonium. The only species in subgenus Epalogogonium is Rhipsalis paradoxa. And the characteristic of this subgenus is discontinuous ribs. So you can see there's ribbing, but it's sort of broken up as the plant sort of chains around. Another characteristic of the paradoxa is it's got erumpent buds and stems. Erumpent means bursting forth through a surface. So the new growth in the buds are formed underneath the epidermis of the plant and they burst through. Here's Paradoxa, subspecies Paradoxa from southeast Brazil, altitudes up to 2,600 feet. It has 3 winged segments, and the angles rotate between the areoles, which gives it a chaining appearance. The ovary is sunken, kind of into the stem. The flowers are white to yellow, and the flowers are pretty large. They're approximately 1 inch across. It's uncommon for this to form fruit, but when it does, the fruit is a dull red. This is Rhipsalis paradoxa, subspecies septentrionalis. This subspecies grows in a different range than subspecies paradoxa. This subspecies grows more toward the northeast corner of Brazil, whereas paradoxa subspecies paradoxa grows in the southernmost portion of Brazil. That's how this actually gets its name. Septentrionalis is a reference to the 7 stars of the Big Dipper that point to Polaris, the North Star, and it's a term in map making that means northward direction. Kind of an interesting little factoid. So this particular subspecies has narrower stem segments than subspecies paradoxa, and the flowers are yellower. Here's another couple of nice examples. There's the flower bud from the side. You can see how it's sort of got that erumpent growth, they call it. The flower punches out from inside the stem rather than forming on top of the stem in the areole. It forms from deep within. And there's a beautiful chained specimen that we saw at the Fern Society show a few months ago. Here's a rather different clone of Rhipsalis paradoxa, subspecies septentrionalis. It's from Bonn Botanical Gardens, and it's got pink flowers, so that's unusual. Normally you would see yellow for this particular subspecies. The next subgenus we're going to look at is subgenus Erythrorhipsalis, erythros meaning red, and the species in this subgenus are characterized by having red fruit and campanulate or bell-shaped flowers. Here we have Rhipsalis pilocarpa from southeastern Brazil near Sao Paulo in seasonal forest to 3,000 foot elevation. The stems and fruit are covered with fine white hairs. It has campanulate flowers which open widely. Pilo means hair, carpa means fruit, and the status in the wild is vulnerable. So not quite endangered, but vulnerable. A few pictures of the flowers on my plant. Rhipsalis campos portuana is from eastern Brazil, from the Atlantic forest, specifically from Serra de Itatiaia, at about 7,500 foot altitude. The stems are terete, almost clavate or club-shaped, and it's named for the Brazilian botanist who discovered it, Paulo de Campos Porto. Rhipsalis campos portuana has white campanulate flowers with pink stamens, and the fruit ripens to orange. Rhipsalis pulchra is a fairly rare species. It's very difficult to find. It's from eastern Brazil, grows at 5,000 to 7,900 foot elevation, has cylindric stems, the areoles are reddish, the buds are erumpent, and it has pink campanulate flowers. Pulchra means beautiful. Rhipsalis aurea is another somewhat rare species found in the Rio de Janeiro area at altitudes of 4,000 to 6,000 feet. It flowers in spring to early summer, and it's named for the golden flowers. Aurea means gold. Rhipsalis burchellii from southeast Brazil to 2,600 foot altitude. It has slender stems, and it resembles Campos portuana, but with rosy stems and berries. And the rosiness means that the plant itself has more betulins. So if it gets more sunlight and more fertilizer, it will tend to turn that pretty reddish color, reddish burgundy. Rhipsalis cereuscula from Bolivia, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, all these different areas. That should tell you right there that it's able to grow in so many different areas. It's a very easy to grow species, and it's big box common. It's often called coral cactus or rice cactus, and it's also characterized by dimorphic growth. It has basal branches that shoot out, and then it gets the secondary branchlets that form. It has campanulate white flowers and white fruit. Rhipsalis jungeri from Sao Paulo, Brazil to 2,500 foot altitude has slender elongated stem segments with white campanulate flowers, and it's got red fruit. Rhipsalis clavata from southeast Brazil in the Atlantic moist forest to 5,200 foot altitude is named for the clavate or club-shaped segment ends. It's got campanulate or bell-shaped, acrotonic, meaning forming at the ends of the stem segments, flowers, and the fruit is white. And the flowers smell delicious. They smell like jasmine, I think. Here's Rhipsalis clavata, subspecies clavata. On the right, it's a little more chunkier compared to subspecies delicatula, which is a little more delicate looking. And the last subgenus we have is subgenus Calamo-Rhipsalis, meaning reed-shaped or rounded stems. That's calamos is a word that means reed in Greek. This particular subgenus is characterized by having rounded stems. The flower buds are erumpent, and the new growth is also erumpent. They form below the epidermis, they pop through onto the stem, and once the flower and fruit is formed, there are craters left on the stem after it flowers. So it's got like these scarry crater-looking areas. Rhipsalis dissimilis is from southeast Brazil, from seasonal forest above 2,650 feet altitude. It usually has multiple buds per areole. The stem angles can be ribbed to cylindric. It has sunken woolly areoles. The flowers are about a half of an inch or so across. There you see the flower buds, the flowers, and the growth habit of the plant. Very pretty species. Rhipsalis flacosa is named from the Latin flacosus, meaning soft hair or wool. It's from Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela. It has an erumpent growth habit. Subspecies flacosa from eastern Brazil has green stems, greenish-white flowers, and white fruit. Flacosa subspecies hohenoensis is from eastern Paraguay, Argentina, southern Brazil, has golden flowers and white fruit, and it's relatively rare. Rhipsalis flacosa subspecies pulvinigera is from southeastern Brazil. It generally has red-tinged stems, pretty large flowers to 1.8 centimeter, that's pretty close to an inch, pinkish fruits, and the word pulvinigera means cushion-bearing. At the base of the scales, the stem is swollen into a prominent cushion. And here's some flowers that I saw at the Pentacle and got pictures of. Really love that woolly base to the flowers there. And you can see the ovary is sort of buried into the stem. Rhipsalis trigonoides is from Brazil around the Sao Paulo area. This was formerly known as trigona. It has strongly three-angled growth. The flowers are white to pink, and they're rather large, approximately an inch. The fruit is red. Now, a little farther back in the program, we took a look at Rhipsalis dissimilis, subspecies dissimilis. Well, this particular subspecies of dissimilis, called Epiphyllocacteae, has been moved down on the list on this program to be closer to the plants that it's more genetically related to. So this species, or subspecies I should say, will probably have its own species designation soon. It's that different from Rhipsalis dissimilis subspecies dissimilis. It's got upright growth habit, large flowers up to an inch across, and it's from South Brazil. Rhipsalis flacosa subspecies Oreophylla means mountain loving. It's from Brazil at 4,000 up to 5,700 foot elevation. Cylindric stems that are 6 millimeters across, lacking raised podaria or scales. Flowers are 12 millimeter and they're greenish. The fruit is white, and it's kind of rare too. It tolerates temps down to 39 degrees because, as we said, it is from mountainous areas. And here you can see Oreophylla plant. Rhipsalis tucumanensis was formerly Rhipsalis flacosa subspecies tucumanensis from the eastern Andes of Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina, and specifically from Tucumán, Argentina, which is where it gets its name. The elevation is 1,600 to 6,500 foot where it grows. It has pink tinged petals. And our latest directory species section does not have this separated out into a separate species yet, but I'm assuming next edition we will have this listed as a separate species. Look at that fruit. That's kind of cool looking. You can see the little flocose tufts there at the base of the fruit. Rhipsalis nevus armandii from southeast Brazil, from the Atlantic forest below 3,200-foot altitude, is epiphytic and epilithic. It has cylindric stems. The flowers are 3/4 of an inch across. They're cream, and the fruit is red. So this is Rhipsalis nevus armandii, form nevus armandii. It's named for Amaro Nevus Armand, who was a Brazilian botanist. And this species, Nevus armandii, like other species in the subgenus, has erumpent growth. But what makes this particular plant interesting is it can have different colored flowers. There is a kind of a peach-colored flower, a yellow-colored flower, and there was even a white-flowered clone reported by Dr. Rose. The berries are dark red. So there are the dark red berries. Now, Rhipsalis nevus armandii has an interesting form that's very sought after. It's called Forma megalantha. And on the right side, you can see the large flowers on Forma megalantha. On the left is the form Nevus armandii. The megalantha flowers are up to 1.5 inches across. Here you see Rhipsalis nevus armandii, Forma megalantha. It has thicker stems than the regular form of Nevus armandii, and as we mentioned, a bigger flower. It's from the island of São Sebastião, Brazil. You can see the plant on the right there, very thick stems. Makes me wonder if this forma might possibly be tetraploid. I don't know. Interesting question, though. Rhipsalis Hylocereeae from Brazil in South Espírito Santo has red-purple flowers. They're up to about 10 millimeter or less than 1/2 inch. It has indeterminate terete stems, which means kind of cylindrical, mesotonic and acrotonic growth. So it's got kind of weird growth pattern. It kind of does its own thing. This is closely related to Rhipsalis puniceodiscus, and it's named for Werner Höhler, who was a Bonn Botanical Garden Rhipsalis cultivator. The red flowers attract hummingbird pollinators. Rhipsalis puniceodiscus is from eastern Brazil. It grows to about 4,000-foot elevation. Puniceus means red or purple, and discus means encircling, so it's got that red circle in the center. The flowers are fairly large, to about 3/4 of an inch or 1.7 centimeters, and it's named for the stamens, which are red or orange and rarely yellow. The plant has indeterminate growth habit. The fruit is red and it ripens to yellow. Here's a specimen out in nature, growing in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Gorgeous, just like a sheet or a curtain. Well, that was quite a few Rhipsalis species, and now we're going to move on to genus Schlumbergera. The holiday cacti, named in 1858 for Frederick Schlumberger. There are a few species from the Atlantic coastal mountains of southeastern Brazil at 2,000 up to 9,000-foot elevation. These plants can be shrubby. They can be epiphytic or saxicolous, meaning growing on rocks. Many of them are pollinated by hummingbirds, interestingly enough. They prefer cool, shady, and humid conditions. The flowers can be symmetrical or asymmetrical, and this genus has formerly been called Zygocactus and even Epiphyllum. And there you can see on the map, the red area is the area of distribution for most of the species within the genus Schlumbergera. Schlumbergera truncata has stem segments which are characterized by having pointed teeth. The flowers are zygomorphic, which means they have a different shape on the top than they have on the bottom. The pollen is yellow. The flowers bloom in late fall, and the hybrids that are derived with a lot of heritage from the truncata are called Thanksgiving cactus or also crab or claw cactus. These bloom fairly early in the fall, around Thanksgiving time. Now, Schlumbergera russelliana looks a little bit different. It does not have such jagged teeth as the species we just looked at. This has stem segments with rounded teeth. The flowers are pendant. The pollen is pink. And hybrids that have a good percentage of Rhipsalideae heritage are called the Buckleyii group. This species blooms more in the winter time than in the fall, and so therefore the flowers from the Buckleyii group are referred to as Christmas cactus. Here's a comparison again of the growth of the two different major types of Schlumberger hybrids. The Thanksgiving cactus on the top, the crab or claw cactus, Schlumberger truncata, and on the bottom the Christmas cactus, which are the Buckleyii type hybrids derived from Rhipsalideae. Here's Schlumberger opuntioides from coastal southeast Brazil. Again, at high altitude, 5,600 to 7,900 feet. This particular species is more woody and more cylindrical than the other Schlumbergera. Schlumbergera lutea has two different subspecies. This is subspecies lutea. The name lutea also refers to the yellow flowers. It's native to the Atlantic forest of southeast Brazil and grows at up to 2,600 feet elevation. This species was formerly known as Hatiora epiphyloides. It's epiphytic and sometimes epilithic. The stems are jointed and flat, and it has yellow flowers in the spring. This is Schlumbergera lutea, subspecies Bradii. It's a little more delicate looking than the subspecies lutea. The photo on the left is the specimen at Huntington Botanic Gardens. They keep it in their pool greenhouse there. And I noticed they had it growing in New Zealand sphagnum moss, which is what I have my plant growing in. The specimen on the right appears to have been grown in a little bit more sunshine, so it's got a little bit of that purple flush to it. On the left, we see an herbarium specimen of Schlumbergera lutea, subspecies Bradii. And on the right, we see a specimen in full bloom. Schlumbergera microsphaerica is from southeastern Brazil. Rocky habitats, very high elevation above 8,500 feet. The stems are cylindrical and spiny, a little bit spiny. The flowers are small, usually red, rarely white. Schlumbergera Coutskyii is from southeastern Brazil, mostly epilithic, from high altitude moist forest. It was first described in 1991, so a fairly recent discovery, and it has small purple flowers. Next, we have tribe Phyllocacteae. This may seem like an insignificant tribe with just genus Phyphora, but I have seen some suggestions that all of the genera from Hylocereeae should be moved over and included in the tribe Phyllocacteae. So who knows what will happen in the future? That would be a big shakeup if that happened. But we have genus Phyphora in this tribe right now from Bolivia and northwest Argentina. Phyphora asuntapatensis was named for the locality where it was found, Cerro Asuntapata in La Paz, Bolivia. It's at about 4,400 foot elevation. The areoles are large and woolly. It has flat stems with the margins flat to convex. It's similar to Phyphora boliviana, except the stem margins are convex and the flowers are orange-red. This is Phyphora boliviana. As you might suspect, it's from Bolivia. The stems are angled at the base and then flattened, and they grow to 12 inches or so long. It's similar to Phyphora asuntapatensis, except for the concave stem margins. The flowers are white, pink, or orange-yellow. You saw the beautiful pink flowers of Phyphora boliviana in the previous slide, and here is a clone which is mostly white. It's just got a little pink tinge to the petals. So there is quite a bit of variety in the blooms of Phyphora boliviana. Phyphora ianthothele is from Bolivia and northwest Argentina, found at up to 4,200 feet altitude. It has spiny growth. The flowers are cream, the fruit's red, and it derives its name from the term iantho, which is violet, and thele is nipple. So it's got these little violet nipples where the areoles are located. Phyphora miyagawa is from Bolivia, La Asanta. The stems are angled and spiny. It has large orange flowers and white fruit. And it's named for the man whose estate it was found on. Look at all the blooms on that stem. That's Phyphora monacantha, subspecies monacantha. It derives its name from mon, which is one, acantha is spine. It has one spine per areole. This is from Bolivia and northwest Argentina, up to 6,500 foot altitude. Angled or flattened spiny stems. The flowers are about 3/4 of an inch across, and it has spines and felt where the flowers are based. Here you see another shot of the branch with the flowers all in a row there, really pretty. And on the right side, you see the entire plant. It's got some buds, it's got some open flowers, and it looks like it's got some fruit forming as well. Here's Phyphora monacantha, subspecies Kimnachiae. Even though it's named monacantha, meaning one spine, Kimnachia subspecies is spineless, and it has flat stems. Phyphora parangoniensis is from Bolivia, and it's growing at altitudes of 8,500 up to 10,000 feet. It can be terrestrial or even lithophytic. The stems are winged and pendant. Here's a little better depiction of the stems of Phyphora parangoniensis. This was formerly classified as Lepismium. There on the left, you can see it's a little spiny too. It's got some fruit forming there. And on the right picture, you see buds. This is the last tribe we're going to be looking at, tribe Lymanbensoniae. And the genus, the only genus in the tribe, is genus Lymanbensonia. It's named for Lyman Benson, who was an Arizona botanist. Genus Lymanbensonia is found in Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru. It can be terrestrial or epiphytic. The stems are flat and spiny. The flowers are small and tubular. And there's a picture of Lymanbensonia micrantha. Lymanbensonia micrantha is from Peru at altitudes up to 8,000 feet. It's characterized by 2 to 3 angled stems, woolly, thorny areoles. The plant is generally epiphytic. The fruit is red, and here's an interesting fact: it's pollinated by hummingbirds. Well, here's another species that's a real mouthful, Lymanbensonia incachacana. It's from Bolivia. It's named for the Inca Chaca site, which means Inca bridge. It can have erect or pendant growth. The flowers are pink to red, and the berries are red. And not to be outdone, for the longest, most complicated name, we have Lymanbensonia choquequireensis. This is a newly described species from Cuzco, Peru. It's only known from the vicinity of the archaeological site of Choquequirau. It has 4 angled stems and small flowers. This concludes our program on epiphytic cactus species, Part 2. A sincere thanks to everyone who shared their photos and information.